Right, the last 3 weeks in France, we've seen extraordinary events unfold. It started off with what we call the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vest. Began protests against the government-imposed increase in taxes, fuel taxes on diesel, which was going to hit the poor in France, who are already under great pressure due to low wages and rising living costs. So this was the final straw for many of the French people, especially in rural areas. And they began to block roads and basically gather in large numbers and make their voices heard, you know, as the French do. The French love to get on the street and they love to protest. And we looked at it and we thought, oh, another French protest. It will come and it will go. The next week, it got considerably bigger. And then it became obvious that something else was happening here. This was an uprising against President Macron. This was an uprising against the institutions of France, which had betrayed the French people now for decades. And the French had had enough. They want their voices heard. They are not happy with the direction their country's going, and they wanted to change direction. And then they started publishing opinion polls. President Macron, who won the 2017 presidential election in May 2017 with a huge majority in the second round of the voting. He got 63%, and his popularity had stayed above 50% since his election, and then it gradually started to slide, and then suddenly it fell off the cliff, and suddenly he was getting under 30% in the opinion polls. But as these last 3 weeks have unfolded, his popularity has slipped dramatically even further. He's now under 20%. In fact, he's only just touching double figures. This is the president of France, which means that 90%, 80 to 90% of the French people are now opposed to President Macron. They want him out of office. They want rid of him. They're sick and tired of him. How did this come to be? I mean, how did a man who had such goodwill from the public become so dramatically unpopular so quickly that he's creating a new French Revolution? It all started the moment he was elected. In his acceptance speech, he said that the borders of France would remain open and the immigrants would be encouraged to continue coming in to France. Now, people shrugged their shoulders at that and thought, oh no, not more of this. But his policies since have further encouraged immigration. He stood against Salvini and against Orban as they tried to control the flow from Africa and from the Middle East into Europe. He's encouraged the Spanish to open up their border to allow Africans in that way into Europe, into the European Union. Once they get their foot on the other side of the Mediterranean, on the European side, they can then move into other European countries. So not only has he encouraged the inflow to continue, his policies within France have redirected more and more resources towards the immigrants. He's building houses, social housing for immigrants. He's pumping money into their education, investing as heavily as he can in their education. And of course, France has already got a huge budget deficit, a crippling budget deficit, and a massive tax burden. And now he's demanded that the French people, the indigenous people of France, pay even more to finance his investment in these growing immigrant populations. We're talking about millions of people. There are over 6 million Muslims in France. 80% of them are not participating in the workplace. They're unemployed and they're living off government handouts. And of course, that's billions of euros every year to finance this. And the French people are being squeezed to produce this money, and they've had enough. They've had enough. They've had enough of being second-class citizens in their own country. And they've had enough of Macron and his agenda pushing globalism, pushing open borders. Open borders mean the third world invades Europe and invades our welfare state and eats our taxes day by day. And the French have had enough. Their living standards are being hit hard while the immigrants are coming in and living the life of Riley. It's a joke. And of course, eventually, there was going to be an uprising about this. 3 weeks ago, it started. And then 2 weeks ago, it got a lot bigger. hundreds of thousands of people across towns in France and in Paris itself, marching, especially along the Champs-Élysées up to the Arc de Triomphe. It was where people are aware this is an uprising. This isn't just a protest against rising taxes. This is an uprising against Macron himself. Because Macron himself has mocked the French ever since he was elected. He always takes the photo opportunities with a Muslim woman or his black. He had two African boyfriends who were basically half-dressed, semi-naked, and he was enjoying. He was elated to be in their country. They were laughing and joking. I mean, the guy's a dubious character, full stop. No one's sure of what he really is. We know he's from a banking background. He was in the elite French civil service. And his policies have been not only to reward immigration and immigrants, but also to reward the rich. This is classic globalism. He's cut taxes for the rich. He's reduced regulations for the rich. So he's working for two groups in society, the extreme elite and the lower echelons, the immigrants at the bottom, and the great bulk, the middle class French people, the ordinary French people, the working class French people, who are working hard each day to provide for their families. They're the people who are being hit by Macron. And last Saturday, it really exploded, because not only has he upset the National Rally, which is Marine Le Pen's new party, he's also upset Mélenchon and the residue of the French left. These two groups have come together on the street now. He's united the whole of France against the Macron, except for these two extreme groups. And of course, the French state, the police and the public sector, which he has also rewarded. Now, the problem for the police is this isn't why they do their job. They're not going to go to war against the French people. They had enough. And as the violence escalated last weekend in Paris and across the country, the police took off their helmets. And the fire services refused. They turned their back on the authorities. They don't want to be the agent of coercion for Macron. Macron has got to confront the situation himself, and he's got to listen to the people. And of course he did listen to a degree, and he's dropped this supposed increase in fuel tax. But the people are not satisfied with that. They want a complete change. They want Macron out. Démission, resign. President Macron, he must go. They have lost all faith in him. And they've lost faith in the institutions of the Fifth Republic of France, because their voice is not being heard. Their interests are not being served. And of course, France has a history of revolution. Going back to 1789 with the Jacobins, or 1830 when Charles X was overthrown, Louis Philippe. 1848, France arose in revolution. 1871, the Paris Commune. Of course, after the Second World War, we had 1958, the uprising against the Fourth Republic, where Charles de Gaulle had to step in to save the French government. And then, of course, 1968, when the streets of Paris were alive. But it wasn't anything compared with last weekend in terms of violence. So the French establishment have been shaken to the core. And tomorrow, Saturday, December the 8th, Macron has brought 80,000 police onto the streets to face down the protesters. He's brought armoured vehicles into Paris ready to face down the protesters. He's not going to face them down himself. He's pushed his Prime Minister in his place, because Macron is hiding now. He is frightened. He's like a scared rat, and he's running for cover. Because I believe that the forces of the French state will not attack their own people. The police don't want to do this. They know the people have got justice on their side. They've got legitimacy on their side. There's a huge demographic deficit in France. Macron's En Marche movement, which won the last elections, which got him in the presidency, it was a fabrication. Macron presented himself as someone to bring France together, as someone to listen to both sides of the argument, but he hasn't been that at all. He's been a pure globalist. He's talked about the end of the French state. He's talked about a Europe without nation states. He's actually pushed the French people to one side. He's mocking the French people. He's abusing the French people. He's stealing the money off the French people and spending it on his favourites. And the French people are not taking this. They're not taking this anymore. This is an all-out insurrection now. And tomorrow in France is going to be incredible. Because if France falls, if the globalist regime falls in France, forget about Viktor Orban, forget about Matteo Salvini. This is the end of the EU project. This is the people. This is the beginning of a nationalist, populist takeover across Europe. This is the peoples of Europe reasserting their authority against the elite. And it's long overdue. And Vive la France! Vive la Revolution! We shall overcome. Tomorrow, Paris. Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed this channel. There's a subscription button. Hit the subscription button. The many subscribers we have as possible, the better. There's also a donation button. If you'd like to make a contribution to this channel, there's a PayPal link in the description. We're hoping to buy new cameras. We're hoping to buy a camera which will enable us to film on the rally. We need constantly, equipment has to be renewed, and we have to pay travel costs to go to these places. The better the equipment we have, the more videos we can make, the easier we can make them. So if you can afford to make any donation at all, I would very much appreciate that. Thank you.